Hi, I'm Bob Dixon. Welcome to the Eagle Insight Podcast, your go-to source for bold and actionable leadership insights. With more than 30 years as a military officer and a strategist, I know leadership is about real impact. In this series, I sit down with top industry leaders to uncover their challenges and their success secrets. Ready to elevate your leadership? Well, hit subscribe. And if you'd like to be a guest, visit 5eaglesleadership.com/interview. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Eagle Insight Podcast, where we help leaders everywhere be just a little bit better. I am excited to talk to Dwight Cook today. He's the founder of Leading with Pride, which is a leadership development program that's been transforming lives across multiple countries for over 6 years now. Dwight's story is one of, I don't know, I would describe it as resilience and transformation and courage, and this leading authentically in a world that often demands conformity. So the questions we're grappling with today is whether or not we're witnessing a necessary correction of programs that lost their way, or if we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Abandoning valuable work on culture and inclusion just because it got caught up in some political activism. Dwight brings a unique perspective to this conversation as someone who's built his career on transforming teams, developing leaders, and someone who understands both the corporate world and the very real challenges faced by marginalized communities. He's positioned to help us navigate this complex terrain. So let's start with some fundamental questions. Dwight, thanks for being here, man.
You're welcome. I look forward to the conversation.
So Dwight, your program is called Leading with Pride. But I want to start with something like even more fundamental. Like before we talk about diversity and inclusion, let's talk about our shared humanity. Like you've worked across 6 countries, people with vastly different backgrounds. So what have you learned about what connects us versus what divides us?
Okay. And let me just add just a touch about my own background so the perspective is understood, is that I'm an engineer by training, love my facts, and love to be in charge of my own designs and feel like I'm in control. And so I ended up, I morphed my career into, I started in international technology transfer and building factories, and then got drafted into Lean Six Sigma and led a Lean Six Sigma team for a while. And then for the last half of my career in corporate space, I was a team transformer of some kind, director of team transformation. And I would embed myself with a team anywhere from 9 months to 2 years to try and bring that performance of that team up. And I was always kind of in an international role. And so, as you said, 6 different countries, like 30 different teams over 30-year career. And then the last, I'll just say the last, since 2016, I've been focusing on this leadership development program primarily in India, where I hope to take what I learned and make it available to people that wouldn't otherwise get it, wouldn't have access to it. So I'm taking a lot of very expensive corporate training tools that I had access to and trying to package them in a way where it's accessible to young people in minorities, and that worked for lots of people, but minorities was my focus. And so going back to your question, what do we have in common? I look at myself as kind of a global citizen, and in that perspective, I have grown a great respect for just this experience of living. What we would share in common, we all are exploring this extremely beautiful, if we choose to look at it that way, complex, risky thing called life. And we all wake up in the morning and trying to make sense of it. We try and figure out how we're going to survive, how we're going to find meaning. And it's this vast universe of profound beauty that we're all trying to find our way through. And related to that, the other kind of four things that I emphasize is that underneath all of us, we feel overwhelmed. um, you know, we create mechanisms that help us manage these billions of signals that our brain gets every minute. And we create these models. They're all full of conflict, but we we simplify things by having these models, and but we all don't feel secure in them. So there's this. We all deep down are overwhelmed by life. Um, and then related to that, it's a lonely experience because we can't help but be self-focused. We are an entity, we're an organization that is always going to look externally and internally. And so a big part of that is we strive for connection. Whether we're an introvert or an extrovert, we relate in different ways, but we look for this connection. Um, and then the last two things, there's this tension between that, and there's a number of things that are we're always in tension between. Uh, but the most common one is this tension between needing to feel safe and really that stability. We think stability is safe, um, but it's the best measure we have for what is safe. What worked in the past keeps us safe in the future. So it's this stability. But we also find that stability confining, and we have this curiosity, and there's this tension between trying to be better, learn better, figure out more, make better models of the world, and yet be safe, or what we perceive safety. So those are really the most common fundamental things in my experience.
That's awesome. No, what a great model, right? So summing that back to you, like most of us feel overwhelmed, so we create models to simplify, and then we doubt our models. It's a lonely experience, so we're all seeking connection. There's a tension between feeling safe, which requires this stability, but stability is also confining. How'd
Yeah,
I do?
exactly. Yeah.
Man, that's pretty cool. I think you're right. I think that we all have this common experience of experiencing the world, right? And we all experience it in our own way through our different models, our worldviews, our biases and beliefs that we collect over time through various sources. So few of us will challenge those biases, beliefs, and worldviews that we collect over the. We don't even know where many of them come from.
Yeah, I agree. We start out adopting those from how we see the world, and from what other people give us, and then over time we start piecing together our own to various degrees, but they're largely inherited.
I agree with that. At some point, we have to reject that as a legitimate source of our beliefs and biases,
Or
right?
yeah, or and add to it, modify it, build on it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I had an argument. I guess I had a conversation with uh, a gentleman that when we got down to challenging a very core opinion that he had, that he couldn't figure out exactly how to articulate why he disapproved of something,
Hmm.
and eventually he just came up with, well, I don't know, that's how I was raised. And I said, well, that's okay as far as it goes, but you've been on this earth a long time. He was somebody in his 50s, early 60s. I said, you've been on the earth for quite a while. You've walked your path. But if you're relying on that's how I was raised, that's a pretty dangerous position to be in. Let me put you in a historical context. Let's say you lived in the deep South in the early 1930s. What would constitute acceptable entertainment might include going to lynchings. Now, we all know that that's wrong, right? We all know that today, that that is not acceptable behavior, but that's the way those kids were raised.
Yeah.
And if they relied on that excuse for their worldviews, biases, and beliefs, then they'd still be doing it. But at some point, somebody who said, no, you know what? I was raised that way, but it was wrong.
I can make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think people who are introspective have a different journey if they're willing to challenge those things.
Absolutely, and that's scary, but it's also powerful because when you start doing that, you're in charge, and you take ownership, and you uh, and you realize that every decision you make has risks, and over time you'd be able to deal with those risks less fearfully and more objectively. So you begin to be able to drive your own growth,
Yeah.
and that's not just the world view and the values. That's your own growth about how do you influence people. How do you move beyond yelling at people and expecting them to change to really being able to understand what is important to them and tie into that so that they see that the change is actually better for them, and in a respectful, empathetic way. And that all takes you being in charge of who you are and not relying just on how you were born. It doesn't mean that every way you were born was bad, and it doesn't mean that you lose respect for your parents or for your traditions, and in many cases for your religion. But you build on that, you add to it, and you're in charge of. You're not limited by, but you use that as a foundation to grow.
Yeah. I think for to a large extent what we're talking about is the psychology of how people process information and how we think about things, particularly the things that we perceive in the world. Those models that we create are that shortcut because our brain, when it has to figure stuff out, is actually it uses a lot of energy, right? So it creates these shortcuts, these models, so that we don't have to
Yeah.
figure out the same thing over and over again.
Well, and they're important because if you think about it, without them, we are this baby crying with waving our arms and hands, not sure how to manage all these signals. We're suddenly, I mean, there's 500 million signals coming to us inside our womb. Once we get out of the womb, there's 1 billion signals every second. We can't figure it out, and and these models we create help us to move forward, help us to do something. And
Absolutely, and you use that model until you figure out it doesn't work anymore,
right,
and then you change it, right, and you
right,
add on to it,
exactly.
right. Um,
And you never make it. It's never perfect. You
right.
know, right. I have to quote one of the people that inspires me, and this comes from being a process engineer in statistical process control. One of the founders, I think his last name is Box. There's Box and Cox, and they did a lot of books. And it was all models are wrong, some are useful.
George Bush
And
is a legend. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it. Well, so, but when we take these models that are going to be wrong, and we use them as like categories and labels when we see something or experience something that may be familiar, we're like, oh, I've seen this before. So then you apply a model. Um, that can lead itself to like increased tribalism, I would think, because we
right.
immediately see somebody who looks or acts or is from a certain place or a certain way, and we immediately go, "Oh, I think I understand them because I put them in this category or I give them this label."
Right, right. And to your first point, the people who really to study decision making will tell you that the number one fallacy, the number one way your decision fails, is if you assume what happened in the past is predictive of the future.
Right.
Uh, and so being able to make really good decisions in business requires that we look at the past, but not be limited by the past. And our brains, to your point, there's different terms of it, and people get into the actual names of parts of the brains. But there's a jungle brain, and then there's a collaborative brain. And our jungle brain is tradition. It's all there. So is the collaboration. It's there, but that's very tribal. That's where you make quick decisions and say, hey, they look like me, so they're safe.
Right.
But if you think about it logically, there's nothing. That's the first way someone could penetrate your defense wall in your tribe, is to look like you. And so, assuming safety because someone looks like you is not a very sound decision.
I agree with that. I think the codicil is also true. Is that just because they don't look like you does not mean they are dangerous.
Correct.
And I think that's where a lot of our tribalism is coming from right now, is that there are people that are looking across at the other, and they're seeing whatever differences they want to and saying, okay, I cannot collaborate with them. I have to be in opposition to them, whether it's because they look different because of skin color or they look different because of something they're wearing. To me,
Or
that's
yeah, whatever their label is, liberal, conservative, or whatever. Yeah,
whatever it is, right? And so if you're carrying the flag, you are the other, and therefore you must be automatically dangerous. When in fact, there are many people that think alike on many topics, but differ on just one or two.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So
Um,
can you walk us through how your leading with pride actually works? Because I think there's some interesting things that we just laid out there that our audience could benefit from your perspective about what your program does. So what
okay.
would like a journey look like for somebody who goes through it?
Well, so I'll use the term minorities, but I don't want to limit that to racial or the traditional things of minorities. I think uh, minorities in the sense of people who feel outside growing up, people who feel very different, um, grow up and as a survival mechanism, learn to be protective. They learn to hide their difference and try to blend in with everybody else, just to survive in school, to have any friends. And the first thing that we try and do is through a very reflective process where people write about the most important points in their lives and then share them, is that they learn that they can interpret those moments differently in a way that empowers them. And so they begin to look at the reasons why they thought they needed to be, it became this default, almost subconscious, I need to be protective, that they can interpret those differently and they can find empowerment in them. And at the end of that process, we hopefully start them on a journey where they look at their difference as something that can actually be monetized, that can actually end up in being a strong contribution. And we do that through reflective, and then we do a lot of culturally important um, people that what might mean something to them that were basically liminal, that were people that have used their liminality to create good impact in the world. And so that starts the journey. We do some traditional things that are available to people like Clifton strengths and other strengths. And we look at styles where people can start looking at styles more objectively. But in the end, they are able to take that empathy and respect that they gain from their own experiences and where they're starting to feel their own worth and be able to extend that to others so that they realize this is an important decision I made in my, we call them personal moments of truth. And those personal moments of truth that I have, other people have something similar. And
Mm.
by understanding people at that depth, you um, empathy is becoming weaponized. So many of our words are becoming weaponized. So some people call it compassion, some people call it empathy. I think the respect has got to be in there, where you look at somebody who's different than you and you say they've made similar decisions in their life, but it doesn't matter what the outcome was because you respect the difficulty of it, you respect the circumstances, and you create that ability to connect with people. Suddenly you have an ability to influence them, you have an ability to connect with them and collaborate with them in a way as equals. You don't have to be an authoritarian that say you have this goal and go do it. You are able to say this is how this goal, this is how this task benefits you individually and aligns with your goals, with your experiences. And this is why this unifying vision is going to be better for all of us. And that's the type of conversation around change that brings lasting change.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, you can get short-term change by taking a power approach, but if you want, and sometimes you have to say, we're going to do this now just for expediency, but by building the skill to be respectfully empathetic you can connect deeply with people and influence them. So that's the end of the journey. We to put it to practice. We don't want to be just a teach and take off. We put it to practice. They have to work on a project, and then at the same time, we assign them a mentor. Our company sponsors provide mentors, and we train the mentors on how to be a people building mentor, and then they work together 4 to 5 months and complete a project, and then they get certified.
Wow. So there's a lot in there to talk about.
It's hard for me to be brief. I get a little too passionate about it, I guess.
I love your passion. I really do. Um, One of the things that really stood out in that is teaching or emphasizing the empathy or compassion, and sometimes it's just something really simple. You use this term, respecting the difficulty of someone else's path,
Yeah, yeah,
and on a little kind of microcosm level, like one of my personal goals is to be seen and experienced when I meet with other people in the world, is somebody who's inspiring, somebody who is grateful, and somebody who is uplifting. And
okay,
that's how I want to interact with the world. And so I try to remind myself of that constantly.
okay.
And it's easier some days than it is others.
Oh yeah,
But a small moment when you're on the 6 o'clock flight and you're stopping at the coffee shop while you're waiting for your flight, and there's a woman there who's just tired, and she's getting you your coffee, and there are people who are impatient, and she's obviously been there for a minute. It's the 6 a.m. flight. So take a moment and you ask her, "Hey ma'am, what time did you get up this morning so you could be here and make coffee for me?"
yeah,
They'll brag on it. They'll be like, "I got up at 3 o'clock this morning to make coffee for you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that."
yeah,
Because it's just taking a tiny moment to acknowledge that she did something this morning when it's easy for us just to ignore them.
yeah,
Now you scale that up to your community, you scale that up to your business, you scale that up to your social group, and you say, what are you doing to ask Dwight, what time did you get up this morning so that you could be there to be with me?
yeah,
Spending
yeah,
some time and acknowledging and respecting the difficulty that other people have, the challenges that they've overcome, and the sacrifices that they've made. I love what you do in your program, man. That's
yeah.
great.
Thank you. I feel very honored. I mean, we've had around 250 people go through the program, and the joy for me is that I've been able to listen to so many of those stories, those journey lines, and the heroic things that people have done in their lives to be able to get where they're at is amazing. And very grateful, very, very grateful for that. Whatever happens in the future, I've got that rich, rich connection
Uh,
with so many people and their great stories.
that's a beautiful way to interact with humanity, my friend. So let's talk about some of the difficulties with changing some perspectives. So we dive
Okay.
into like the current moment, right? In January, the Trump administration signed executive orders ending federal DEI programs and encouraging investigations into private sector initiatives. So, how difficult has it been for organizations like yours since this shift began?
Well, uh, I think that all organizations that work in the space of trying to help other people have been impacted.
Yeah.
Not just the DEI thing, which we'll talk about. I look forward to talking about, but just want to mention, in India, I'm very familiar with the network of NGOs that I work with, or nonprofits as we call them in the U.S. And many, many, many have just shut their doors because the little bit of support that they had from USAID has gone, and it went suddenly. Um, and it was for many, it was only partial funding, but they didn't have time to come up with other funding, and So the impact in the lives for them has been huge. In the DEI space, where we're like our organization was mostly funded from multinational corporations that have DEI budgets. And the ROI for them, for the corporations in our case, was that they got their managers to have, their leaders to have this emotional connection with people from a minority community, which was the seed them for them to become allies of DEI and to go on their own journeys of learning and being engaging leaders. And so that's what they were paying for. But the power of the presidency and those executive orders has created a very strong climate of caution. And our organization, like all the other organizations that help in the DEI space, have seen a major impact. And all of us are trying to have seen an impact in terms of reduction of engagement from the corporations. And many of them still have the budgets there, and many of them still haven't said anything about decreasing it to the public, but they're very cautious. There's business stake and government contracts. Some of our MNCs have a large percent of their business that comes from government contracts, and so there's a wait and see on how this is going to shake out. So the impact is great, and it's opened the doors to making us hear as DEI practitioners, making us hear about reserved concerns or criticisms of DEI that we often tuned out and weren't really listening to before. And I mean, collectively, I speak collectively. Individually, people have very different approaches in their own kind of DEI journey. But collectively, I think it made us hear criticisms and made visible criticisms that lots of times we didn't hear or listen to before. So it's certainly been disruptive, and it's certainly been challenging, and it's certainly challenging for my organization. We're trying to keep costs in alignment with revenue at the same time we try to adapt and try and figure out how we're going to go forward. Um, so, but I'll just continue on kind of this thought. In difficulty and in ambiguity, there's lots of times opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that DEI in general, like all social change, like all of this, it's messy. You don't know the best way to go about this. It's systematic changes. And so DEI, a lot of people thought the easiest way to make this company change was we're going to hire people. So they put out quotas. And they sometimes it was hard quotas, like you're a manager, you have to have X women, you have to have X people from a racial minority. They set goals on this is how many people I want to have registered in my country or my company as LGBT, depending upon the metrics. And they communicated rapidly and kind of used a compliance approach, which then whenever you go compliance without really working on the change management, you create resistance, either explicit or artificial harmony or whatever it is. And so I think the quotas created this idea of a diversity hire, where the team were involuntarily involved in what they saw, or some of them saw, or this resistance point of view articulated as the diversity hire. They're not as good as us. We have to work harder to make up for them because they are quote unquote the diversity hire. And I hope going forward that we can get this. That's not reality. I mean, the reality is that these people who come from different backgrounds often are twice as motivated. It depends. It's a very individual thing. Some of them, you do have the cases of people that feel entitled, and you have people that buy into the fact, oh, I am inferior, and they have this brain width going on that's consumed with how do I make up for the fact that I am inferior. And so there's all that problems, but that do exist and they're real. But at the same time, there's lots and lots of stories about there's this fact that there was a quota, got somebody in the door that was able to prove themselves, and they soar.
Yeah.
And but
Yeah.
in the
Colin
current
Powell was one of those guys that said if there was no affirmative action, I never would have made it. Uh,
yeah,
and look what a great leader he is. I don't know anybody who's ever met the man that wasn't impressed. And there
yeah,
he is saying that. Now, does that is there going to be a backlash against it? Yeah, because in a zero sum game, that if
exactly.
somebody gets something and you don't, we want to understand that we want to know the rules of it, and when objectively or subjectively you think you are more qualified for something that somebody else got, and you believe it was because of a DEI hire or whatever affirmative uh, action sort of thing that went into that, you're going to be resentful of that.
Right. Yeah. And I have a lot of experience in India, so I'll use India example. India has a reservation. They call it reservation. It's basically affirmative action for caste. And but it's not the same as in the U.S. It's much. It doesn't get into the private space near as deeply. It's much more about government hiring. But um, all wherever I went, hearing life stories, people would say I wasn't able to get the school that I wanted. I wasn't able to get the career that I wanted because this, they let some other minority in that wasn't as qualified as I.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the negative side. And I'm hoping that this upset helps us refine and get beyond the the perception of the DEI hire. Um, eh,
Yeah. I think that's going to be a long, difficult road. I suspect, right? Because there's been damage in people's minds about how. But I love you said all social change is messy. Um, but when you talk about a compliance approach to diversity, where you want to change the makeup and you want to change behavior, but you haven't done any effort to change minds.
yeah. Well, and so as you part, that's the hard part. And so companies have DEI leaders for various reasons, and companies. Um, so people who really understand DEI, understand that it's about culture.
Right.
And when you make it about numbers, then you know people don't thrive. And you might hit your numbers, and you might be able to declare success, but DEI leaders really that are really impactful understand it's about culture. And we talked to people talk about the road forward. I would like to see, and I think it's a good idea, is instead of having chief diversity officer, you have chief engagement officer, or chief impact officer. And we have to do the harder work at looking at culture. And culture is systematic. Culture is, you have to look at how your promotions are communicated, decided and communicated. How do you create career paths for people that everybody's a leader in some way or another, whether they're in a managerial position or not? I'll cite Intuit here. Intuit was kind of my awakening as I worked for Intuit, because there's this attitude that everybody's a leader, and that your only choice is how you lead. And just the fact that you're visible, that you're a body sitting there, means that you have influence on others. And so that was, I think that's the kind of idea that we create this culture where we train people on how to use conflict the most powerful thing to unify uh, uh, somebody is when they've got a disagreement and you create a dialogue in a safe space where they suddenly aha. The Harvard Business Review just had an article about conflict aware leaders, and they give a whole bunch of examples. of these leaders that actually take people that can't. Camp David and Carter was an example of this, where he took two opposed leaders that didn't want to talk to each other, made them go to Camp David, and they stayed there for 2 weeks. And at the end, they maybe publicly weren't so good, still weren't best friends, but privately they were networking with each other. And I think conflict means people are passionate about something. And if you can harness that passion, the commitments and the energy behind those commitments, you can really unify people. And that's the kind of skill that we need to develop in this culture. And it's how do you do raises? How do you communicate? How does your senior leader start his communications to employees? And it's those values put to practice. And I hope we get a greater focus on that. A lot of companies just created DEI on their websites because it was necessary for, to be. Some companies wanted to have
Well,
the
people felt
program.
coerced
Yeah.
into it, right? There was danger for leaders to not be seen as a vocal supporter of DEI.
I think I would say there was business risk, the real business risk.
Right.
You wouldn't get contracts. You couldn't attract the best. You couldn't attract the best employees. You got investors. There's progressive investors that wouldn't invest in you. So that if you didn't have a visible DEI program.
Yeah, it
And
was
so
it was very
yeah.
interesting. People who had labeled themselves as social justice warriors, insisting that people fall into their definition of what DEI should be, and making it very difficult for business leaders to have their own approach to it, or to spend the time trying to evolve the culture or change minds into a more inclusive environment. But instead, it was you can't be on the sidelines of this. You have
Right.
to be vocal. BLM was one of the great examples of, do you support BLM? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, well, what have you done? Like, well, I'm not opposed to them. Well, that's not enough. It's not enough. You
Uh,
have to be actively doing something. If you're not active, if you haven't taken to the street, if you haven't showed up to the protests, then you aren't doing enough. And I think leaders were scared because that movement it wielded a lot of power, social power, and real economic power when somebody would, well, we're boycotting this. And in some places there was, I think, more of a microcosm. There was actual physical danger for some folks. Uh, but that, I mean, when social change is messy, yes, but lasting change doesn't come from being coerced.
I think you're right, and I think so. Um, this current environment we have is highly, highly polarized, and there is this expectation of you will take one side or the other.
Right.
There's no room in the current environment, and we can talk about all the reasons why, and I have a point of view like many other people do, but there's that people are talking about that, but the bottom line is there's very little room for nuance. There's very little room for people to deal with complexity, and it's like you respect one side and not the other, or you respect the other side and not this side. And um, that environment just has people yelling at each other, and you're on our
Yeah.
side if you're yelling with us. And it's not about listening, and it doesn't get back to being able to respect this humanity. And
Yeah.
humanity meaning respect the tough decisions that even the cis white guy that went to Harvard and had everything paid for in a scholarship has in his life. That every single person has this complex set of values that you can influence, and that gets all ignored in the way our political and social media environment is today.
I agree with that a lot. I think when we talked about labels early on in the conversation, um, I get criticized a lot because people will in a complex topic that we're discussing, I'm taking an as objective road as I can to try to understand both sides of things. We learn through
Mhm.
conflict. So I don't
Right,
mind having hard conversations as long as I'm learning from them. If we're just yelling at each other, that's useless.
right.
Nobody's doing any learning. There's nothing that's going to change. Uh, but with these labels things, the people were like, "Well, hold on, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican?" I said, "No, why? Why is that an important question to you? Because
Right.
as soon as I give you a label for me, then you could beat me up with a label. Right now, I have to
Yeah.
own anything that one of those political party says. Oh, well, you're one of those people because you support this, or if you're a Democrat, you support that. And in fact, we can be much more complex than that as humans, as individuals.
I absolutely agree, and I struggle with that myself because I am a social activist, and I see the systematic oppression that happens to poor people, and that and understand. I believe that systematic is both internal to them as well as external.
Yep,
You
agree.
know, there it's complex, and the it's not easy for people to get out, but some people can, of whatever their situation is. And so I am that. But as soon as I say, as soon as somebody comes to me, and I'll use myself here. As soon as somebody comes to me and expresses one little opinion that supports Republicans, you know, there's a part of me that says they're Trumpistas. You know,
Right,
yeah,
right. We
right,
put
yeah,
a
yeah.
label
So
on
that
them, and then we can beat
you
them up
throw
with
a
the
label
label.
on them, and
Yeah.
that relieves me of both the responsibility and the opportunity to understand them.
Oh, yeah.
And so this idea of avoiding labels is really powerful. And because what do you do when you avoid that label is you force people, including yourself, to have a discussion, a
Right.
detailed discussion that respects the complexities and respect the deeply felt decisions people made that led them to where they're at today.
Yeah.
And uh, and and democracy to really function depends on us talking to each other, which we're not doing a lot of today.
No,
Um,
I think we're doing a lot of yelling right now. But but I think that lends itself to something that you've said before. You said that leadership takes a certain amount of objectivity. And I
right,
think that's a really powerful statement because I want to, when I'm looking at a complex topic, I want to be as objective as possible. And in most cases, both sides have a valid opinion.
right,
It does depend a lot on how many of the facts they've been able to trample to come to that opinion,
right,
and how many that they're able to twist to get other people to believe their opinion. But as a leader or as a complex human, I think just being a good human, we want to maintain some of that objectivity and say, well, I see the point that the left has, but I also see the point that the right has, and somewhere in between there might be a way forward that is good for our community.
right. There's a way we can collaborate to move forward.
Yeah.
And so, and I think this is where people can they have um, kind of I have a negative connotation to the word empathy,
Yeah.
because sometimes empathy, you can have empathy for one group but not another. And a typical failure mode for me as an activist is that, I'm a gay man. I went through a whole long story of trying to, my religion was pushing me into reparative therapy and all of that, which took me a long time to come out of. Uh, and um, and I see that, I feel that, I have empathy for that experience. But I have to work to have empathy for feminism. I have to work to have empathy for people with different abilities, and so it's that objectivity is
Oh,
where you
yeah.
can extend that empathy to where you can see, there's similar experiences, even though it's very different, and or the trans experience. I first out started well, ew, I had that somebody talks about wanting to remove genitalia, and I like, yeah. But it took me some time and effort to really deep dive and come to a respect where now, I I am an advocate for trans acceptance and trans rights in a complex, um, nuanced way, I think. And it takes work to be that objective. It takes work to extend
Yes,
the
it
empathy.
does.
The first step is to build empathy for ourselves, and sometimes we act brash doing that. Sometimes we yell, and then the next step in the growth is be able to have enough self-strength to be objective and extend that empathy to others.
I think that's brilliantly said. What struck me is when you talked about having to work at having empathy for different groups because you don't identify with that or that's not part of your personal history. Obviously, it's easier if your personal history has some connection with a group
Right.
to be more empathetic to them. There's an old meme from years ago, and it asked, what happens if you see an endangered animal eating an endangered plant? What are you supposed to do? And that has played over in my mind over and over again when I see things like the pro trans athlete argument versus the feminine argument. Like, hold on, we're not being inclusive to the trans to allow them to participate in women's sports, but by allowing them to be inclusive, to allow them to do that is being unfair to a different group. And so it's a very complex subject, but so many people just jump on one side or the other without giving it a whole lot of thought.
Yeah. Well, for me, this is like many things in politics, and sometimes this is intentional, and sometimes this is just very human. Is that it's avoiding the real opportunity. And so what I mean by that is that we think sports is fair, or sports are fair because we're used to them. You know, the fact of the matter is, if you just look at people that we call biological women, there's a huge diversity of people in genetics, size, and part of succeeding in athletics is you work hard, you get in shape, but another part of it is the talent you're born with, the shape of your body. You know, uh, it's going to be hard for a 4 foot person to be a basketball star in today's environment. And so for me, the opportunity here and the discussion that's being missed is recognizing that sports are not fair, and they never will be, but we can make them better. And how much more people would be engaged in sports, and how much more money would people be able to get from audiences if they create categories for sports that are progressively more fair. And that's there's not a lot of creativity being talked about in this discussion where
Right.
you can do both. Uh, and uh, and yes, I can see the point of view where someone who grows up with a man's build, whether trans or not, with the people that have more testosterone naturally or whatever it is, that may not be fair to work on, but it never has been. It never has been, and the great opportunity is for us to think beyond the labels of gender and uh, and figure out more creative ways of getting more people engaged in sports.
Yeah. I think there's a lot that we could think about if we would take time to do so.
Yes, yes, and
So
yeah.
where do we go from here? Do I mean, like, what does effective and like authentic inclusion work look like going forward?
So um, I think uh, it's all of the above. It's not, I can't say everybody should stop quotas. There's some companies that would be the best place they can start, and um, they shouldn't stop numeric goals. But ultimately, diversity and inclusion is creating cultures that engage and attract, engage, empower, and inspire diverse people to contribute to a unifying vision. And I think we can be better at articulating that vision and not be distracted. You know, success is sometimes the biggest barrier to growth, and we can't be distracted by
Yeah.
our own success. And so, as advocates, I think that's the first important thing. If we're not successful, we're not going to have a budget. We're not going to be able to prioritize um, social change, and then I mean, I'm not going to tell companies they shouldn't participate in the larger discussion. That's something they're going to have to figure out. But uh, what also matters a lot is what do they fund? What do they do both internally from a culture? What do they do in their CSR that is not just um, keeping people alive, but is helping them participate more, helping them grow more? And, and so that's where I hope this journey takes us, even after um, the administration has changed and the zeitgeist, maybe reverts to a new state, whatever that is. I think that's what we do to really service our customers, our stakeholders, our shareholders, and our employees. Is really how do you resolve those conflicts and turn them into bonding, turn them into understanding,
Yeah.
uh, and and that's for me the highest priority.
I'm a huge fan of using conflict as a mechanism for learning. I don't like it when conflict becomes the end in itself. Let's just fight. That's fine for the boxing ring, but it's not a good way to run your community or your
Right,
business.
right, yeah.
Man, Dwight,
Well,
I thank you so much for being here, Dad. This is such a timely topic. I think there's a lot of people out there that are thinking about things very uh, binary, right? It's either you're on this side or that
exactly.
side, um, and that there is so much room in between the one and the zero in a binary sequence that
Right,
we as complex beings we should feel an obligation to explore the complexity in between them.
exactly. A real powerful leader doesn't settle for an or decision. They look for an and decision.
Yes, yes. I still will struggle with when you see a endangered animal eating an endangered plant, but I'm sure that somewhere along the line we can figure it out if that's what we run into. Uh,
Is a non-endangered plant available?
right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. Uh, so, man, thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing your story and your perspective on this incredibly important topic. I think my listeners are the kinds of people that like to think through things a little bit more than your average bear. And I think they're going to get a lot out of listening to you.
Thank you. A lot of fun. Wish you the best.
Thank you so much.